And welcome back to the fifth and final session of ROF 2023, titled The Political Outlook in Indonesia. The session will be moderated by Dr. Hui Yu Fong, Visiting Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the Indonesia Studies Program at ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. Joining him on the panel are Dr. Anies Baswedan and Ms. Yeni Wahid. Dr. Hui, you may begin. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the last session today on the political outlook in Indonesia. It's my pleasure to welcome you back from your tea and coffee. And today we have two very distinguished speakers with us to share with us about Indonesia. We have first Ms. Yeni Wahid. Ms. Yeni Wahid started her career as a journalist with the Australian newspapers Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. And she was also Special Staff for Political Communication for former Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono in 2006. Now she is Director of the Wahid Institute, and at the same time she plays a very key role in the Nahdlatul Ulama, which is the largest Islamic organization in Indonesia, which also has the largest Muslim population in the world. And just to put things in perspective, one of the things that she's organizing for the 100th anniversary of the Nahdlatul Ulama this year is a dinner for 1 million people. So that will be a huge challenge. Next, we have Dr. Anies Baswedan. Dr. Anies Baswedan is no stranger to us. In fact, both of them are no strangers to us. He was formerly Minister of Education and Culture in President Jokowi's first cabinet in 2014 to 16. And before that, he was Rector of Paramadina University in 2007 to 2016. Most recently, he just relinquished his position as Governor of Jakarta. And those of us in the room knows that he also has another status. But today, I believe he also speaks as a free intellectual with us. So thank you to both of them for being with us today. We will start off with, actually today, this year is a special year to talk about Indonesia. One, because it's a 25th anniversary of the Reformasi movement, and Pak Anies will deal with that topic later on. But first, we will have Ms. Yeni Wahid to deal with the topic of the upcoming Indonesian elections in 2023. Without further ado, I invite Ms. Yeni to take the podium and to share with us her thoughts.
Thank you. This is the problem of short people. You need to always adjust the mic. So it takes some time to do that first. Anyway, thank you very much, ISEAS, for having me here. And it's always a great pleasure for me to be here. And it's such a good start to the new year, meeting all friends that I haven't met for so long, and learning about what's happening in other countries in the region as well. So I hope that all of you had drank enough coffee so that, because I won't be able to deliver such a fiery remarks and passionate remarks like what Anthony and Kyrie earlier delivered, No one can top issue of bromance. So in politics, so I just have to go with the boring topics. And I know that you want to go straight to the jugular about the electoral politics, but I will drag on your patience to and talk about non-electoral politics first. Okay. So apart from the electoral politics, of course, there are issues that are the drivers of change in Indonesia. And they are legislations and regulations that shape the Indonesian democracy and also the economy. So I'd like to touch upon two new laws that had created some controversy in Indonesia. First one is the Omnibus Law. Of course, this is the government's effort to try to ease the, of trying to deal with the problem of overregulation in Indonesia and to improve the ease of doing business in Indonesia. After all, we still, our rank is quite remarkable, 70 out of 190 countries, according to the World Bank, when it comes to the ease of doing business. So this law tries to ease restrictions in 11 critical areas, including labor law, capital investment, business licensing, corporate tax, and land acquisition. This law also aims to help micro-enterprises, creating less hindrances in doing businesses, especially in the issue of employment and licenses as well. And in Indonesia, MSMEs actually employ around 97% of the labor force. So this law should be very impactful in ensuring job creation in our country. There are some criticism about the law from activists, especially about environmental concerns, less stringent oversight for the sake of quicker licensing and job creation. That's the accusations. Concerns about labor rights, such as the issue of minimum salary, contract workers, severance payments, and etc. And the reason why these two laws and regulations are important, because in the absence of political issues, then issues like this has the potential to be an issue that could be used by the oppositions to consolidate their influence in the society. They said that's why this, the code and the law is important. We've got the criminal code, the infamous criminal code that we just recently being reintroduced. And, Indonesia caught a lot of flags in the media, especially, and some of the highlights about the criminalization of sex outside of marriage, cohabitation between unmarried couples, etc. There are several issues that are actually more darker than this sexual side of it. Yeah, for example, things that many democratic activists are criticizing is the freedom of expression, the potential for the law to actually hinder freedom of expression, the potential for to be going to jail if you are deemed to be insulting the president, for example. Also, the law also requires people to get a permit to hold a protest, and also bans spreading fake news and views that counter to state ideology. The government and the parliament, of course, says that the new code is actually more progressive compared to the earlier code that was influenced by the Dutch law during the colonial time. Now it's actually, when it comes to sex outside of marriage, before, the old code actually is probably more stringent than now, because now you actually need to be family members to be able to report of if you see any dilly-dallying or any sexual activities is happening that you don't approve of. Now you have to be the parents or the sons, daughters, the children, or the spouse to be able to report the case. So contrary to what people might, some people said that this will have an impact on number of tourism in Indonesia, I don't think that it will have a big impact, because the code has always been there, even in the past. And Indonesians, of course, adopt this attitude of just live and let live, you've got people enjoying relationship outside of marriage, and no one actually, and very small cases in which the society actually pay attention to that. There are also criticism from activists about environmental concerns. sorry, I read the wrong note. Okay, so now I'm going to the next slide about the G20, because this is also some of the issues that talked about in G20 also shape the way many dynamics are going to be shaped in Indonesia. And of course, the energy transition is a big issue. The just energy transition partnerships that Indonesia managed to secure, 20 billions of fund in the next 3 to 5 years to phase out our dependence on coal energy and to help Indonesia transition towards renewable energy. This will bring big changes to the way we conduct businesses in Indonesia. At the moment, Indonesia and Malaysia are the only countries that are on track also to meet the zero emission goal from the forestry sector by 2030, 0%. So GTP will help us to develop better programs, better initiatives to speed up this process, I believe. The issue of food security, of course, the supply chain disruption, of course, a big issue for the world. And Indonesia, the Indonesian government has rolled out plans for food estates to ensure food security. The global health issue is also another issue, big issues. The President Jokowi had called for a more just and resilient global health architecture. This translates into pandemic funds, vaccines, drugs, medical devices, etc., and call for eliminating trade barriers for vaccine raw materials. So in conclusion, global issues and energy, food security will still highly influence Indonesian strategic policies. Okay, now we're going to the domestic challenges that is also going to color the way the political issues in Indonesia. We've got the issue of Papua, still quite, there are still many unrest there, still many conflicts there that needs to be resolved, high level of corruption, very low level of service deliveries, and still a big problem, a big headache for the government to solve. We also have the armed organizations there for separatist movement. And then the second big issue that we also face is the religious motivated violence and extremism. This is still a challenge, a big domestic challenge for us. We've got new cases of lone wolves. We've got desperate individuals easily provoked by emotional rhetorics using the language of religions and the language of politics, because these two are emotional languages. You don't think, you don't use your rational brain when you deal with these kind of issues, or if any issues is presented using this kind of rhetorics, using religious and political rhetorics. Social media algorithm, of course, creates echo chamber that led to crystallization of feelings and emotions. And of course, we have the hate spin in political arena. And we'll be seeing much more of that, I would presume, in the coming months. We also have a shrinking space for democracy, but this is quite interesting because now it's not very linear, it's not diametrical between state and the people, but there are also the non-state actors who are doing the discriminations, the attacks, etc. So we've got the buzzers also occupying the social media space and threaten freedom of expressions in that arena. We've got politicians employing buzzers, and this is very, very dangerous trend that we're seeing, and one that has potential to create really a big divide in our society. We've got non-state actors in the form of religious militias carrying out attacks on religious places of worships, on gatherings, religious gatherings, etc. Still a big challenge for the government. But I think overall, our terrorism, our BNPT or anti-terrorism agency is doing quite a good job, our dancers as well. I think the Bali bombing had brought about quite a positive spin to the unraveling of the whole networks of terrorism in Southeast Asia. And the police had arrested thousands of jihadis. And some of them, a majority of them actually, have gone to jail and are going through a proper, legal procedures for sentences. So now we come to the exciting parts, the political landscape, the political electorate issues, the dominant factors that will be coloring the political landscape, the political elections. There are three: the economy, the political identity, and the stability. And the young voters will determine who is going to be elected. And what is very interesting for me is that even though the economy is not, there is no one single factor that would determine the election. So, and the young voters actually will influence the way the election is going to be shaped, but not in a very clear way. See, for the young people, they have the issues that relates to the economy that for them are important, like the social welfare, access to job, corruption, eradication, democracy, and freedom, and also health. But on the other hand, there are also some surveys that indicates even though the level of satisfaction towards the government when it comes to economic indicators is lower, so President Jokowi enjoyed 70% of support, of approval rates from the public. But when it comes to the economic issues, the government's performance is only 40%. So there are quite interesting combinations of angles here. And when you look at the attitude of the people, and even though they say that economic issues are important, but then again, some of them are still very, very supportive of the government overall. And I don't think you can see the graph on the bottom. It's quite interesting. The characteristic of leaders that the young people are looking for. First one, they're looking for honest and not corrupt individual, down to earth. These two are characteristics that people assume, or that President Jokowi, in the public's eyes, still enjoyed. So being firm, being charismatic, being religious, actually lower in the rank when it comes to youth preference for a leader. But on the other hand, we have a big population of young people who are apolitical. They're not ideological. They're not well-versed when it comes to political substances. For them, it's superficial. And more than 50% of them actually said that they haven't decided who they're going to vote for. But given that their understanding of politics is very superficial, they will fall back to that instinct when it comes to voting. This is our prediction. And usually that instinct is shaped by who you associate with, what kind of clubs you're part of, you belong to, what kind of community you're a member of. And if you're a member of religious communities, then that will shape your voting preference. So that's the interesting data that we've got. despite the fact that the election will be important. Okay, sorry, the other issues that is important also is stability. Stability meaning that the approval rate of President Jokowi actually shows that people want a continuation of his government. And that's why all these narratives of the extension of his term is still around. It's not going away. And people are very emotional when it comes to President Jokowi. We see expressions in the social media, how people express their feelings about President Jokowi. And this is not buzzers. These are real accounts with real people who said, please continue. So that's also interesting, because then President Jokowi will also shape, will also influence and color who will be the likely winner of the election. The one that gets his endorsement will get a big boost when it comes to winning the election. Now it remains a mystery who he's going to endorse. But okay, so I think I'll end with that. I was going to say that despite all of these talks about electoral politics, for us in Indonesia, despite who is going to be elected, the trajectory of Indonesia actually shows a solid ground, and that whoever is there, whoever is going to be elected, Indonesia is not going to stray from that trajectory. So hopefully we'll be able to achieve the 2045 vision, that Indonesia becomes a country of $3 trillion GDP, and with 10,000 GDP per capita. And that's the vision that is stated by the government. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Yenny. A pleasure always to listen to you. Next, we will have Dr. Anies Baswedan to share with us his insights and assessment of the Reformasi movement and the extent to which it has implications for Indonesian democracy. Dr. Anies Baswedan, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Allow me to extend my appreciations for the invite to come back to ISEAS. It's been a while since regularly participating on this event. If I'm not mistaken, last time was 2012, and then after you serve in government, then you're so busy with government work, and sometimes you just get away from academia. So it's good to be back in this forum. Thank you for the invite, and I've been invited to speak about Indonesia's status after our reform in 1998. So next May, in May 2023, it'll be our 25th anniversary of our reforms into democracy after a new order in power for 32 years. So it's good for us to take a look where we are in terms of that. And I think Yenny's presentations earlier give us pictures where policy now matters, where issues are matters, but also there is these questions about, is our democratic consolidation continue, or we may be facing an interesting phase of our democratizations. It was discussions about the extensions of terms for the president. It was one of a subject that highly discussed in Indonesia in the past few months. So on these occasions, before I go on the details of that, allow me to underline a few things that makes our democracy today is actually much stronger than what one would have expected. One, yes, our reform is in 98, but the work for democracy started way before 98. Long before that. Number one, if you look at democracy, what does it mean? It means a process in which you create situations where political process allowing equal opportunities for ideas, for institutions, for political groups to compete in a fair way and to allow freedom of expression, to allow freedom of political aspirations, and that's key for democracy. And for Indonesia, the beginning of that is not in 98, but in 28, when we agree to have one common language that is Bahasa Indonesia. It may look simple, but it is a unifying factors that glue Indonesia together until where we are today. This is a very diverse nation. More than 400 spoken languages, more than 400 ethnic groups. Imagine if we have democracy and we have no common language. Okay? So the foundations was clearly made long ago. And the language that was chosen was not the language of the majority, but the language of a minority, the Malay language. And we adopted that, and it becomes glue that make our nations as united as it is today. So now, when you have the House having meetings, the Senates, the government meetings, there is no interpreters in the back of the room. Everyone speak one common language. That's one. Number two, which is also important, is the abolishment of aristocracy or feudalism. When we had our independence in 1945, there was no less than 120 sultanates, local kingdoms across the archipelago. And we decided to respect that as cultural heritage, not as a political entity. And it has created a sense of equality. With that, we are able to see someone, son of nobody, daughter of nobody, elected into higher office, even the highest office. And the perfect example is Pak Jokowi. He was regular, coming up, born, raised in a common family, a regular family in Java, grew up and become president. That equal opportunity was there because of that reason, number two. Number three, for the past, under New Order, we are able to see civil society that is vibrant. Ian, his fathers, almarhum Pak Gus Dur, one of the key, most prominent civil society leaders then that gathered all civil societies activists as promoter of democracy, and these groups have been the one that prepared themselves for post-authoritarian regime. So that's number three. Number four, we had 6 elections under New Order, and it was a kabuki because we don't have to have a survey. We know who's going to win. We know who's going to lose. We know that Golkar will be number 1. We know that PPP is going to be number 2, and we know PDI at that time was going to be the 3rd. But 6 times of election every 5 years. What does it mean? It is training of electoral process for the entire populations. Imagine you have 500,000 polling stations. If it is a new democracy, had no trainings for electoral process, we may be facing problems like those in Africa, like in Latin America, like in Eastern Europe, because they had no trainings. The population had no trainings of what is elections and how you organize elections. The Arab Spring is the same thing. You have an authoritarian regime, but you had no electoral process. Yes, it was kabuki, but it was a good trainings. So when we had our reform in 98, the foundation was there. And then it comes freedom. In the past, you have elections, but only 3 parties can compete. After the reform, then we have so many political parties. New political parties was just mushrooming. And yet, what we are seeing is we're able to see elections the way it used to be. People used to come to election station, vote, you go home, you watch for the result on TV, and accepted the result. So that foundation is important to be taken into account when we are seeing today signs of regressions of democracy. I remember when I was in schools, whenever people talk about democracy, what makes democracy consolidated? And one of the key factors, when we were in schools, we were told that the losing party is willing to accept the result. If the losing party is willing to accept the result, then democracy consolidates. From our experience in Indonesia, I think we need to add another conditions. One is that. Number two, the winning party is willing to leave office. Because if you, on the one hand, the losing party is willing to accept the result, but then the winning parties doesn't want to leave office, they will work on rules and regulations to extend their authority. And I think we need to have both. And Indonesia definitely need to have these two now. On the one aspect, we have proven to be good. After the reform in 1998, starting in 2005, 7 years later, we have direct local elections for governor, for city mayors, for region. And elections were everywhere. And challenge to election result is massive. If we have more than 520 local elections, more than 300 local elections were contested in the courts, in the Constitutional Court. More than 300 local elections. But what's unique is this, and I see this as a sign of solid democracy. They went to the court, challenged the result, and when the judge decided, they went home happily or unhappily, but accepted the decisions of the court. They're not going to the streets and protesting endlessly. And that is signs where the foundations of democracy is there. So accepting the result. Now, the challenge that we are facing now is, are we able to see and are we able to sort of control those in power willing to end his authority as our constitutions and as our rules of democracy has outlined. And I think that's the challenge of today. And, conversations about extension and third term in itself was something that was unthinkable a few years ago. Never anyone would have discussed whether or not we will have that term, because the main reason why we have reform in 98 is, the one reason is to end multiple terms of presidency into 2 terms. That was the core message of our reform 98. So in the past few months, where we are seeing this issue, it is a sign that belief in democracy is decreasing among the ruling elites, but not among the elites of Indonesia and not among the people of Indonesia. So don't conclude this conversation as signs that the elites of Indonesia, the leadership of Indonesia is willing. However, minimum conversation on this. Minimum conversation. You are not seeing political party expressing their view on these issues. You're not seeing top leaderships clearly expressing a view on this. And I see this as sign of democracy that is not good. When you are having systems in the world of democracy and non-democracy, you see the pillars of these two. In a non-democracy, the pillars is fear. If fear is deteriorating, then authoritarian regime will fall apart. In a democracy, the pillars is trust. If trust is deteriorating, then democracy is declining. But what we are often seeing in the case of Indonesia in the past few years is we started to see emergence of fears, expressions of view on the issue of democracy have declined significantly. However, I have to put a note on that. During our meetings today, the PDIP is having its anniversary today. And on this anniversary, I was just checking as we were listening to the sessions that Ibu Megawati made a statement this very day that two period is two period. Okay? Dua periode adalah dua period. Megawati has shown her quality, Ibu Megawati has shown her quality as guardian of institutionalizing our democracy, guardian of our democratic consolidations. She was part of the oppositions during the new regime, and when Indonesia experienced a reform, she became an important player in our political landscape. In fact, she's the longest serving political party leader yet. When she ran for election, she is willing to accept result when she lost the elections. And when she is in power, like today, she is perhaps one of the strongest political leaders. She is willing to accept the fact that there is a term limit in a democracy. Those two issues that I raised earlier was expressed and clearly set as an example by Ibu Megawati. So what I think going forward, yes, we may be seeing some degree of decline in terms of the quality of a democracy, that the laws that Ibu Yeni presented earlier have shown minimal public engagement in the formulations of the law. Some policies, some important policies have minimum public engagement, minimum democratic engagement. For example, the establishment of a new capital in East Kalimantan. Very minimum political process, very minimum public engagement. It shows some of the sign where democracy is not truly practiced. However, I must underline, we have vibrant civil society, we have freedom of expression in the media, and we have very active social media who will serve as guardian of our democracy. So I'm saying here that yes, there is sign of decline, there is sign of deteriorations, but we have stronger foundations for that. And when the time is needed, they will speak up. I don't think the time is there yet. And what we are seeing, the statement made by Ibu Megawati today, I think will change the course of that conversations. I think by next week, that conversation would have ended. Now, I think starting from today. So I can say that 25 years after a reform, the principle of democracy is there, consolidation is there. However, reform in '98 is not only about electoral process, it's not only about presidential elections. There are other key issues, and those other issues, we are not there yet. Corruption eradications, that is still one of the biggest issues. The supremacy of law, that is still one of the biggest challenges in Indonesia. So there are agenda in which we have to address. But on and all, I would say that we are on the right directions in terms of consolidations. There is some aspirations to shift the gear toward more non-democratic, but we know it's not going to go anywhere. So our democracy hopefully will continue to consolidate. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Anies. Okay, now we come to a very exciting part of the session, which is a Q&A. I will first start by exercising a bit of my privilege as the moderator of this session to pose two questions, one to Ms. Yeni and one to Anies separately. To Ibu Yeni, now you discuss about the upcoming elections, but and you are very deeply associated with NU, but you have not discussed very much about NU's position where the elections is concerned, and associated with that, how you think the Islamic vote would swing, and also associated with that, the issue of identity politics, which was a big issue in the last elections between the conservatives and not so conservative Islam. So perhaps you can give us some insights and share some comments on that. For Pak Anies, looking at how you've been assessing Reformasi and its aspirations, you focus more on the politics. Can you also share with us, in terms of policies, policies that you think have fulfilled the aspirations of Reformasi, but and other policies that you think still have some ways to go in fulfilling the aspirations of Reformasi? Maybe we start with Ibu Yeni first.
Okay. There are two. I mentioned before that President Jokowi's endorsement will deeply color the contestation, and that whoever gets the support of Pak Jokowi will get a big boost in the election. And the second big force in Indonesian politics, and I'm not saying this because I'm from NU, but actually the data suggests that, is that whoever gets the NU voters will also win. I mean, this is very obvious in the last election, during Pak Jokowi's election, because the contested area, the contested province was East Java, and East Java is a stronghold of NU. So whoever can get East Java, in a way, will also get a big boost in the election. So I think Pak Anies should take notes of that. So when it comes to Islamic voters, of course, this is very interesting because the Muslims do not vote in one single mode. You know, the Muslims are very much spread across diverse spectrums. So we've got the Islamic votes. I mean, the Islamic votes and the Islamist votes are very different. You know, the Islamist votes, of course, would, to be frank, would naturally vote for Pak Anies. And the other Muslims, especially the NUs, have not been decided yet. So if Pak Anies plays right with us, maybe we'll endorse him. So we'll see. But anyway, but what is interesting is that the fact that the chairman of NU now, Kiai Yahya Khalil Stakuf, already stated that NU is not going to be involved in practical political matters. So NU is not going to officially endorse a candidate as an organization. So of course, this opens the possibilities of the candidates to talk to our grassroots directly and talk to the structural, organizers of NU, as well as the cultural elements of NU. So the NU votes will be very much decided by the influencers within NU, not necessarily by the structural body of NU, but of course they carry a big weight. But the pesantrens, the religious schools might have different preferences as well. So in a way, it's very hard to just put them in one basket and say that, oh, NU is going to back this candidate or that candidate. But when it comes to the data, actually, most NU voters, when it comes to political party preferences, 25% of NU voters, the biggest chunk, actually votes for PDIP, and the least with PKS. So from there, you can see that despite the fact this is an Islamic communities, but we are the NU communities, the NU people feel more at ease with the nationalist figures. And the latest data also suggests that NU voters will likely vote for Pak Ganjar to this point than to other candidates. But Pak Anies comes second, especially in the province of Madura, not the province yet. They want to have to become a province, but not yet. But the island of Madura is a more conservative elements of NU there, And there, Pak Anies actually enjoys quite a high popularity level in Madura. So I hope that answers your question, Pak.
Thank you, Ibu Yeni. Pak Anies?
With regard to reform, if I may outline, what were the demands of the reform in '98? What were the demands? There are 6 issues. One is bring Suharto and his cronies to justice. That was 1. 2 is amendment to the constitutions on limiting presidential terms and also strengthening democratic institutions. So that's demand number 2. Number 3 is eliminations of the dual functions of ABRI. Number 3, that's 3. Number 4 is autonomy, regional autonomy, wider regional autonomy. Number 5 is eradications of corruption, collusion, and nepotisms, KKN. That was very famous then. And number 6 is establishing equality before the law, or supremacy of rule of law. So those are 6 agenda. And if you look at the 6 agenda, the highest achievement on that was agenda number 4, regional autonomy. We are seeing a massive transformations of not only decentralization, but devolutions. So extensive devolutions in Indonesia that have empowered regional government to be more effective. The challenge is this, and if I may say, as someone who also served in local governments in Jakarta, the challenge is empowering the civil society, the local political institutions to be more active in a democratic process at the local level. When you're serving in Jakarta, then it's there. The civil society activism is there because the national level and the Jakarta level is something that you cannot separate between the two. So being governor in Jakarta, immediately you are part of the national engagement in politics and social issues. But in the regions far away from the capital city, we have been seeing trends of non-democratic tendency of leadership at the local levels. And we have been seeing trends of emergence of dynasties, families that control political institutions. The father become a mayor, and then later on the wife, and then not long after that, the nephew, not long after that, it's emerging. And we are seeing this trend in Indonesia now. So if I may look at those 6 issues, one of the most challenging for us is rule of law. And if Indonesia is divided into 3 major areas that needs to work together and operate in a sync way. 1 is the market, 2 is democratic process or politics, and 3 is rule of law. The first 2, we're doing good, generally speaking. But rule of law, we're still behind. And I think this is one of the biggest agenda that needs to be addressed in a serious way in the coming years. And then with regards to collusion and nepotism, that's the same thing. So that's those 6 issues, if I may comment, where the agenda of the reform 25 years ago and where we are today. Now, with regard to, if I may also comment on some of this electoral behavior, I think we are adding to what Ibu Yeni said earlier. What we are seeing is mixed messages. On the one hand, you're seeing a survey result that shows where people vote based on policy preference. On the one hand, we're seeing that. On the other hand, we are seeing also vote based on identities, based on cultural and emotional reasons. And I think we are seeing that mixed message. Bu Yani explained earlier on the graph where characteristic of leadership that matters to the electorates, especially the young people. But on the other hand, we are seeing voting behaviors of the electorates in the elections where they vote based on identity lines. So we are seeing that mixed messages. But what I'd like to underline here, the fact that we are living in a society where community matters. Community matters a lot. And the smallest unit of that community is family. So, in my observations, if you are in a family where you have a leniency toward one political party, most likely the Gen Z in that family, the millennials in that family would be voting along that line. Family influence behavior, electoral behavior within the family. And in the community, the same thing, in the kampung, in the village. When the leadership in the kampung have that tendency, it tends to influence. There are exceptions of families in that community that vote independently from the rest of the community. You see that cases. But generally speaking, collectively, they're voting in the same direction, collectively. And this is rather different, perhaps, compared to the West, in which individual behavior is accepted more or higher in a way compared to collective behavior. So I'm seeing that in the case of Indonesia. And if I may also add a little bit on that democracy, I experienced serving Jakarta 5 years. Maintaining quality of democracy requires you to reach every single groups within your, in my case, Jakarta, in my territory. Jakarta experienced the highest democracy index consistently in the past 5 years, far above other provinces. We have completely freedom of expressions, and government of Jakarta never sue anyone that criticize, that even send hawks to the government of Jakarta, never. We are allowing complete freedom of expressions. And during that 5 years, we're not seeing one, violence, religious violence, even conflict of religious in an open way, none. And what we are, I think, in our experience, the winning party needs to reach all sectors, especially reaching out to the losing parties. If that is not done, then we are not going to see democracy that is vibrant, that is consolidating. And that's based on my experience. And if you look at the national level, that's often the case. The winning party failed to reach out to the losing parties. And in fact, more pressure to the losing party. And that creates divisions, and that creates sense of uneasiness along the way. Let me end my comment there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Anies. Okay, now I would like to open the time to the floor. I'm sure there are some burning questions around. We'll take one round of questions first. Anyone? Yes, there's 1, 2, and 3, 4. Okay, let's take 4 first. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Termsak. I served in the ASEAN Secretariat for nearly 20 years, and my family considered Jakarta a very happy second home. My question is, what will happen to the Nusantara program to move capital city from Jakarta after President Jokowi's term ends? I assume that it will continue, or will it become a new presidential election issue? Thank you.
Yes, we have another from a
So the question is about the future of Nusantara.
Thank you. I'm Richard Borsuk, a longtime and struggling Indonesia student. And my question actually is quite similar to the last, but let me put it a little more directly. Pak Anies, you want to be president. If you become president, will you stop the funding for Nusantara, or will you keep pushing it ahead? Thank you.
Okay, we have two other questions here. I hope it's not about Nusantara.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Viveko Radian. I'm from Indonesia, from a student of Gajah Mada. Actually, besides democracy, there's one thing that our founding fathers has established, secularism. It's not as harsh as the one practiced in France or Turkey, but a more friendly one towards our religious diversity. It safeguards Indonesia from government based on racial or religious lines, such as maybe our northern neighbor. However, there are still conflicts here and there created by the Islamic radicals, such as terrorism, the use of religious rhetorics on elections, and preventing the building of churches, temples. So my question is, how can Indonesia prevent from backsliding into Islamic radicalism? Thank you.
Okay, one more question from that side. Yes.
So I'm sorry, it's actually related to Nusantara, but it's, very different perspective.
Okay,
If I may.
30 seconds.
Sure. Assuming that Indonesia's political history is deep-rooted with the role of public sentiments as well as the military involvement, does the concept of Nusantara City appeal to the youths right now? And if they do, it would be a great support for presidents in future. But if it doesn't, how does the traditional elites, such as the military officers, NGOs, react to the shift in the historical Mandala from Java to Borneo, where the city is going to be located?
Okay.
I missed the last part.
How will traditional elites, such as military officers and NGOs, react to the shift of the Mandela from Java to Borneo?
So I think we take these 4 questions first. And they seem to all be directed at Pak Anies.
Why everyone is talking about Nusantara and the new capitals? This is yes, indeed, it is one of the examples where decisions about not only relocations of our capital, but building a new city. You have to differentiate between the two. Relocating capital is one thing. Building a new city is another thing. Relocations of capital city, you have an example, from Bonn to Berlin, from Istanbul to Ankara. That's the relocations of your capital. But the case that we are now having in Indonesia is constructing a new city in the middle of basically a rainforest area, and it is a challenge. It will not be complete in any time soon. It is a very long-term project, and the decisions on that have been evaluated. The decision-making process has been evaluated many times, and we did not have that open, intensive, and extensive conversations on why we need to establish a new capital and why we need to relocate to that capital. So this is still an issue that is debated in academic circles, but rarely debated in the political arena openly in Jakarta. None. You're not seeing political party leaders expressing their view. You're not seeing business leaders expressing their view publicly, openly. None. Privately, yes. In a closed session, yes. And you can imagine what will be the conclusions of those private sessions, of those closed sessions. But openly, none. And this is what I mean by, in a democracy, you have to create an environment of openness, a sense of freedom, that you're able to express your view without worrisome of any negative backlash consequences. Having said that, if I were here only as academicians, I would have answered this completely. Okay, now I have to wait for this. To be honest, later I'll answer these questions once it is more clear toward the future. But for now, my answer is standards. My answer is standard. To be honest, my standard is standard. This is no longer a proposal. This is already a law. There was a law of the land stating that Indonesia is going to establish a new capital, and we're moving into that directions. So whoever is now in charge, they have to follow the law. Let me end my answer there. Thank you.
How about the question about Islamic radicalism, how to prevent it?
Let me just add a bit about the Nusantara, add my thoughts on that. And I can see that Pak Anies had probably had a long thought on how to craft the message when it comes the time to answer that question. And I don't envy him in that position, and I think he gave a fitting answer to the question. It's a very sensitive question, and it's but the IKN, the Nusantara, of course, is the baby of Pak Jokowi. And this is, and of course, from what I can gather, that he has every intention to see the baby grows and be his legacy. So I think one could assume that a support for the idea of Nusantara would be one of the factors that would lead to his endorsement of the candidate. So I think this is where Pak Anies was very wise in his answer earlier. Which shows to me also, as I'm here as I suppose as someone that is outside of the political arena, so I can take a more objective and position, and that's very interesting. You know, the fact that Pak Anies actually does not answer directly Pak Anies, because it shows that Pak Anies still wants to build bridges with Pak Jokowi, and that is the news, I think, for many of the media in Indonesia, and you know that well, not media, for the people in Indonesia who readily put Pak Anies in one box and then Pak Jokowi in another box. So that also shows the fluidity of politics in Indonesia. You can have very strange bedfellows. You never know. Maybe PKS will join Pak Jokowi's coalition for the next election. You never know. It could happen in Indonesia, just like DAP. So, yes, so Islamic radicalism, is there a possibility that Indonesia would go into that direction? You know, 3 decades ago, the first time that my father stepped foot in church, he got lots of criticism. We got lots of threats. You know, he got lots of just attacks, basically. First time that he stepped foot in, he visited Jerusalem, we've got the phone just rang nonstop. Those days, it was still the landlines, right? Not mobile phones. So every 5 minutes, there would be someone calling to say, threaten to burn our house down, to, you know, chop our heads down, and, you know, stuff like that. So, but now, we're actually seeing more and more people coming out and just saying the same things, doing the things that Gus Dur did in the past. And they don't have to be religious leaders. They could be anyone who believes that the space of democracy should be defended, not be dominated by any particular group, especially a group that plays the identity politics cards. So I think in that sense, I am still very optimistic about the future of Indonesia. In our societal dynamics, but when it comes to politics, and that's a different matter. We will have momentary time where political rhetorics, race issues, religious cards will be used as cards, as issues that would be used, you know, to consolidate the support from the people. We will see that, and we will see momentary setbacks. But in the long run, I don't think Indonesia will go into an Islamic state kind of future.
On that note, if I may continue a little bit, is we had an experience in Jakarta where election in 2017 was very spirited, to put it in a polite way. Very spirited elections. And people thought it was divisive in the publics. And we may be seeing that. And we have gone through 5 years after that. Has Jakarta experienced tensions in the past 5 years? None. Has Jakarta experienced religious extremism in the 5 years? Signs of that? If you can see any, show it to me. I didn't see any. Any activities that shows intolerance toward practice of certain groups? None. I think one of the very important aspects here to say, if reaching out and bridging to all groups is key. The winning party, I was the winning part at that time, had to reach out to all groups. All groups. And if I may use the word groups instead of minorities and majorities. And if I address to your questions as students from Gajah Mada, our founding fathers had never used the word minority or majority. Look at any document, none. None. They are talking about groups, golongan, but not majority and minority. What's the difference? Golongan is about diversity, minority and majority is about magnitude, scale, small and big. But diversity is never about scale. Diversity is about, so there's so many groups. That's why the term that was used was golongan. Indonesia was founded for all golongan. Not for minority, not for majority, but for everyone. And the word itself is never majority and minority. So we started to practice that. The key word is keadilan sosial, social justice to all. So if leadership is addressing social justice, immediately you address peace. Immediately you address tolerance, because your ultimate goals is justice and equal opportunity for everyone, equal treatments for everyone. Jakarta has never experienced celebrations of religious holidays for all religious groups. 2019 was first time that Christmas carol was allowed in main street of Jakarta. Christmas trees was allowed main street of Jakarta. And when I was asked why, and I said, this is called justice. Equal opportunity for everyone. All groups. It's not about minority, it's not about majority, because our founding fathers has always been talking about equality and never about scale. The big and the small, not of that. And I think we need to come back into that message. The message of equality for all, because, peace that we would like to have is not about absence of violence. Peace that we'd like to have is about presence of justice. When you are seeing a presence of justice, immediately you're seeing peace. And that's what we need to address. And that's what we like to do in Indonesia, in Jakarta. So extremism is part of that issue. You need to address the reasoning beyond that, because religious extremism has always been there for hundreds of years. There are times they emerge and gain public support. There are times they never gain public support. What conditions that make the difference between the two? When you are seeing disparities, when you are seeing disparities between the have and the have-nots, the knows and the knows-not, the work and the work-not, then you are creating a fertile ground for extremism to grow. If you know religion, it will be religious extremism. If you don't know religion, then you'll be seeing Marxism extremism. Marxist extremism. That's sort of the fertile ground. That's what we need to address. Do not create fertile ground for extremism idea to grow. And if you're able to do that, then we'll be seeing a more peaceful situations. Thank you.
I'm afraid we are running out of time. I just want to close on a note where you address one very important question. Ibu Yeni showed us that 80 to 90 million of the voters will be youth. Can both of you, like in the span of 1 minute each, share with us how best to reach out to this constituency, how to grab the youth vote? Ibu Yeni can, serve as a consultant on how to win the votes, and Pak Anies can share with us his strategy as well. Whether you will resort to TikTok or not, I don't know, but share with us what you think.
Yes, the voters' characteristics are quite interesting, the young voters, because they're superficial when it comes to substantive political issues. They are more inward-looking. They care more about their mental health. They care more about their own, the social advancement. They care more about their own small groups. They care less about political parties. They don't have the same kind of loyalty that their parents might have to any specific parties. They are influenced by their peers, but at the same time, they are also independent, fiercely independent. So it's a very, very multifaceted groups of people, and they want leaders that embody certain characteristics, and religion is not there. It's not one of them. It's very low in the rank. But at the same time, they will be easily motivated by identity politics as well. So this is on how to reach out to this group of people. Well, you need to be very well versed in the social media. We've got 90 million of TikTok users in Indonesia. Of course, you need to control that space as well. You need to be present, and I think this is where I think Pak Anies is quite very good. His social media handlers are top-notch. Pak Ganjar as well. And what is interesting about the candidates, right? Because Indonesian voters vote in an emotional way, not in a rational way. They don't vote based on candidates' track records. They vote based on their own projections, the imaginations of that candidate, regardless of whether it is based on facts or not. So if you don't have anything, if you're bland, like nasi putih, if you're not nasi lemak or nasi goreng, then voters simply do not acknowledge you. And we've seen candidates in which they don't even, they spend lots of money, millions of dollars in campaigns, and that's it. Their popularity rate remains low. But then you've got Pak Ganjar. Some people don't know him that well, but they know of him. They know of their imagination of him, and that's what they're going to vote for. And the same with Pak Anies. The same with Pak Prabowo. I mean, everyone who knows Indonesia's politics well enough would know that Pak Prabowo is a secular. Comes from a secular family, yet he carried the banner of Islamist group in the last election, very much the same like Donald Trump. So that's the tricky part of the next election. What kind of imagination that the candidates will be able to implore in people's mind, whether he's a nationalist guy, whether he's someone who involved in identity politics, that matters also. And regardless of the efforts that you try to do, once you are put in certain box, it's very hard to undo that. So I think this is where every candidate has to be careful what kind of message, what kind of imaging that they're projected onto the voters.
Anis, your closing thoughts?
Yeah, let me give you some statistics. We already mentioned earlier about TikTok. Khairi also mentioned about TikTok. How many users of TikTok in Indonesia? It's 99.1 million. So it's almost 100 million users of TikTok. Instagram is second, 97 million. And then Facebook is 42 million, and Twitter is 18 million. So social media definitely is a place, in terms of reaching out, is a place where conversations started, created. The question is it translated into voting behaviors? That is the issue. Often case, it is not translated in the voting behaviors. It is reflected in Jakarta election. It is reflected in the national elections. And in fact, when we're talking about unity or cohesiveness and polarizations, in the social media is always polarizing, but that's not translated into real life where society is polarized. A study by Zulfikar Amir of Nanyang Technological University on Jakarta, whether Jakarta is polarized or Jakarta is cohesive. The conclusion is Jakarta is not polarized. Jakarta is very cohesive. But if you go to the social media, Jakarta is very polarized. So what I'm saying is this: yes, it is a channel where people find information when conversation is there, but I think still there is that wall in the penetrations of that conversations into voting behaviors. So, reaching out can be from social medias, but at the end of the day, I think the more traditional channels of informations, be it regular newspaper, be it online media, be it leaders' influence, is still matters in how the youth is choosing or directing their vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Although this session is unlike the Malaysia panel where you have people who really love each other but having healthy sparks between them, here we have a very, I think, more Javanese kind of session, eloquent, congenial, and Ibu Yeni offering a lot of excellent advice on how to run a presidential campaign. I'm sure you will be very sought after as a consultant.
And Pak Yufong, I just want to say that whoever gets our support will win.
And that's identity politics.
And with that, on that note, please join me in thanking our speakers for making this an exciting session.